Good morning to all of you. It is so wonderful to see your smiling faces here. Appreciate your interest in spiritual things. We've talked about before the very fact that you show up to worship God is an encouragement to all of those around you. Appreciate not only your being here, but appreciate your love for God. How many times have you watched your favorite movie? How many times have you read your favorite book? There are some stories that don't seem to grow old. What I want to do this morning is take one of those great action stories out of the Bible and go through that. It's going to be the story of Rahab, as you can see. And then if I do my job correctly, what I want us to do is just go through the story because it's an awesome story. Several aspects of it are utilized by Hollywood and other authors in different action-adventure stories. They get little snippets out of this. And then, once we go through the story, then we're going to come back through, and I've used the same pictures on the slide for reference. We're going to come back through and take those same lessons and bring them up to 2013. So that's what we're going to do this morning. Hope you're ready for a bit of an exciting adventure as we see what happens. But I've asked you to start with me in Matthew chapter 1 because there's a little bit of trivia here that comes in about the story of Rahab. That is, she is mentioned in the genealogy of the greatest person that has ever been alive on our planet. And in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, the whole New Testament starts out with this verse, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So that's who Jesus is. And then beginning in verse 2, all the way down through verse 16, we get all of the family tree that we're going to have here. Well, in verse 2, you see some of the names are recognizable. We've heard of Isaac and Jacob and Judah. But once you get to verse 3, boy, then there's some characters that I couldn't tell you anything about. And then I want you to notice with me in verse 5, the King James is going to use a different spelling. And Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. That's what the way the King James spells it. And that's Rahab. That's the very lady that we're going to study about this morning. If you're using a different version, it may actually say Rahab. So having pointed out to you that she is right here in the genealogy of Jesus, I now want you to turn with me back to the book of Joshua. We're going to spend quite a bit of time here in Joshua looking at this story. Here we have God's people that are going to cross the river. They're going to take all this land that at that time was said to flow with milk and honey. And for whatever reason, Joshua needed some first-hand information, I guess. Joshua chapter 2 and verse 1. Joshua the son of Nun sent out of Shittim 2 men to spy secretly, saying, Go view the land, even Jericho. And they went and came into a harlot's house named Rahab and lodged there. I simply want to point out in this verse that God requires workers. God, by all the means and power that He has, the miracles that He had, He could have made all of this happen and just had all the people of Israel sit in their tents. He could have had hornets drive the people out or some tornado blow them out of the way. But God, in His plan and His pattern, uses workers. So here in verse 1, Joshua sends 2 workers into this land. And they're kind of going to be symbolic of us later on in our lesson this morning. And then in verse 2, I want you to know that the people saw these workers. It was told the king of Jericho, saying, Behold, there came men in hither tonight of the children of Israel to search out the country. So even though they were spies, either they weren't trying to hide their identity or somehow it got out. And the people of Jericho realized, hey, there are people here that are spying, that are gathering intelligence, if you will. So God requires workers, and the people saw that those workers were there. Well, as the story progresses, they're going to come in verse 4, the woman took the 2 men and hid them, and said thus, There came men unto me, and I wist not whence they were. So this lady hides these 2 spies. Now, I want you to look with me down in verse 6, that she brought them up to the roof of the house, and hid them with the stalks of flax. And then verse 7, the men that are looking for them pursue out. And then she's going to give in verse 9 down through 12 her reasoning for all of this. Now we're going to look at that in just a moment, but I want you to know where we're going as I turn us back to Numbers chapter 14. Rahab is going to tell these two men why she's doing this, and I want you to see the contrast from just these few short pages back. Because back in Numbers chapter 14, as it works out, we've talked about this story of the 10 spies and the 2 spies several times later. But back in Numbers chapter 14, the 12 spies come back. 10 of them say, no, we can't take this land. Those people are like grasshoppers in our sight. We can't do it. Joshua and Caleb try and convince the people that they can, but they don't listen to Joshua and Caleb. The people of Israel, who not too long before this had watched God open up the ocean or the Red Sea for them to walk across, they didn't listen. Now that was 40 years ago. Look with me at verse 33. God punishes them in Numbers 14, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. By the way, I want to throw in a little trivia question here. If you don't remember, why did he pick 40 years? Verse 34, each day for a year. Okay, the spies were gone 40 days. So for every day that they were gone, they had to wander around in the wilderness 40 years. Now that was 40 years ago when God's own people who had just seen these miracles would not listen to Joshua and Caleb and saw these men that were giants. Oh, we just can't do that. Now come forward 40 years to Joshua chapter 2. And here comes her explanation. Here's someone who is not of one of the 12 tribes, someone who's in a foreign land, who heard the same stories and remembered them 40 years later. Verse 9, she said unto the men, I know that the Lord hath given you the land. Now that's future tense. The army hasn't even crossed the river yet. That comes a couple chapters later. And she's already saying, God's given you this land. This is Joshua 2 verse 9. I know that the Lord hath given you the land, and that your terror has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. Now why would they faint? Because of these people. They are on the other side of the river, and they're in Jericho, and they have this huge wall surrounding them. Verse 10, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. And then not only that, what you did unto the 2 kings of the Amorites that were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and, here's this king from class this morning, Og, whom ye utterly destroyed. Verse 11, and as soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in heaven above and the earth beneath. Now, as they go into Jericho, these 2 men, to spy out the land, you wouldn't think they would find anyone that would be, let's just say, on their side. But here is someone who says, oh, you're part of that crew that has a God so powerful that He pushed the ocean aside and let your people walk through. Yeah, I'm going to try and help you as much as I can. And oh, by the way, everyone here knows about that story, and all of us are terrified. So 40 years earlier, the very people who watched that miracle and walked across the dry land, they didn't believe enough. And here's someone, a foreigner, who wasn't even there, 40 years later, who's saying, that story had such an impact on me that I'm going to help you out. Look with me at chapter 5 and verse 1. It came to pass when all the kings of the Amorites, this is still Joshua, chapter 5, verse 1, which were on the side of the Jordan westward, and all the kings of the Canaanites, which were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel, until we were passed over, that their heart melted. Neither was their spirit in them any more, because of the children of Israel. Rahab's already telling them, we know what y'all did 40 years ago. Everyone here is already scared to death of you from 40 years ago. And then, oh, by the way, here a couple chapters later, God does it again with the river that's flooded. So you can imagine how that just reinforced this dread in their hearts. Well, not only is she an unlikely audience because she remembers something of another land that she didn't even see to a different people 40 years before, and she's still scared to death of what God can do if He has that much power. But then chapter 2 and verse 1 says that Rahab was a harlot. So what's her occupation? She's a sinner. She is someone who makes it her business to not be moral, to not follow God's law. That's not someone that you tend to think, oh, that's going to be the ideal person that's going to be receptive to God's plan. And that'll come into play again later on. A very unlikely audience is the point we want to make here. Well, this unlikely audience, in making this decision to help, we're now back in Joshua chapter 2, she's going to put herself in a position of great risk. Okay, now let's read what I was paraphrasing a while ago, verse 4 through 6. The woman took the 2 men and hid them, and said thus, There came men unto me, but I wist not whence they were. And it came to pass about the time of shutting of the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Whither the men went, I wot not. Pursue after them quickly, for you shall overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof of the house, and hid them with the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order upon the roof. So she is committing treason, is what we would call it in our time. I don't know if they had that word back then. They certainly had that idea, what the word for it would be in their language. If you are aiding and abetting the enemy, you are committing treason, and that has always been a death penalty. I don't know of a culture where it's not the death penalty. But she's willing to do this, and she explains why. Here in these verses that we just looked at, she knows who the God is that's backing these guys. There are some times when it's worth the risk. Something might be more important than your city or your country, and she recognized that. Verse 16, please. She said unto them, Get you to the mountain, lest the pursuers meet you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until the pursuers be returned. She knew what would happen to these 2 men if they were caught. It was such a serious offense. So she's protecting herself. She's protecting these men because of the risk. And then you look with me in chapter 2, verse 18 and 20. The men are going to answer, Behold, when we come into the land, thou shalt bind this line of scarlet thread in the window, which thou didst let us down by. Thou shalt bring thy father and thy mother and thy brethren, all thy father's household home unto thee, because of verse 19. It shall be that whosoever shall go out of the doors of thy house into the street, his blood shall be upon his head, which means he's going to die. And that person, their death won't be our responsibility. If they don't stay in this house, their blood, their life is going to be on their head. It won't be our fault. Okay, because they're saying out loud, we're going to kill everyone that's not in your house right here. A lot of death in this story, a lot of risk. Now I want to put a side note here, not only for our children, but anyone else that hadn't thought of this. Lying is what Rahab does. Blatant lying to protect these men. That doesn't mean that lying is okay. Now Rahab does not have a background of the Jews about respecting God. Don't even know if she knows the 10 Commandments. That would include thou shalt not lie. But lying is not okay. I just want to put this in there that God could have taken care of these 2 spies another way if Rahab had not lied. Maybe Rahab just fed them some food and made this deal with them. Suppose she had not lied. Suppose these guards had captured the 2 guys. Well, when the walls fell over, they probably would have gotten back out. There's a million ways God could have helped these 2 spies. He did not need Rahab to lie along the way. In this story, Rahab is never punished for her lies. But don't interpret that as that lying is all right. Now, we'll get back to the progress that we're trying to make here. So she has a tremendous amount of risk in her situation. But thanks to this risk that she takes, she has rewards. And specifically, if you look with me over in chapter 6, where they circle the city and the walls do fall down, she's going to have what we would call salvation. So in chapter 6, verse 22, this is after they've blown, in verse 20, and the walls fall down, and verse 21, the killing begins. Verse 22, But Joshua had said unto the 2 men that had spied out the country, Go into the harlot's house, and bring out thence the woman, and all that she hath, as you swear unto her. 23, And the young men that were spies went in, and brought out Rahab, and her father, and her mother, and their brethren, and all that she had. And they brought out all her kindred, and left them without the camp of Israel. So there's where our incredible story ends this morning. Great Bible story of this one lady who recognized the power that God had that's marching these people across the desert, keeping them all alive somehow, and knew specifically this miracle about the Red Sea 40 years after it happened, and realizes these guys are part of that God's power. I'm going to protect them. And she gets saved out of that. An amazing story of doing something that maybe other people there would not do. For sure, other people were trying to find those two spies and kill them. Rahab, or for sure, let me say they were trying to find those two spies. That's what I can prove from the text. So an amazing story about a woman who realizes something is going on. Now, by the advent of color and underline, I now want to pull all of these points up to 2013 and look at Luke 10, Luke chapter 10, and let's step through all these again. Just like God was requiring the Old Testament Jews to work, to take their sword into this land and actually work for Him and do the battle, God is still looking for workers today. Luke 10 verse 2. Therefore said He unto them, the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that He would send forth laborers into His harvest. God's power has not diminished. There's all these people on the planet. God could make something happen to every person on the planet to cause them to wake up, cause them to realize their life is short, cause them to realize they need to read the Bible and develop a relationship with Jesus Christ to have His blood wash their sins away. He could do that. But for reasons that He knows, because He's God, what He has designed for the plan is for you and I to go out into the field and do this job. God still requires workers. Matthew 5 and verse 10. Just like in this story of Rahab, these workers that are out in the field are going to be seen. Matthew 5 and verse 10. When they are seen, it's not going to be good. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now the two spies, they were not set up on chairs of ivory and brought a feast. They were hidden under the grass, if you will, up on the roof, because they were being persecuted. They were being chased, and it's obvious if they caught them, it was going to be bad. They were doing God's work. Joshua sent them right out there, but they certainly were not treated royally. And here in our culture, nothing says that we're going to be treated royally by doing God's work. That's what He wants us to do, though. Well, not only does God require workers, we talked a while ago about an unlikely audience. Look with me at just a handful of examples here in the New Testament where there was an unlikely audience. John chapter 4, Jesus meets this woman at the well. And she was a Samaritan. And the Samaritans and the Jews had been bitter enemies for hundreds of years. But Jesus crosses this cultural barrier, if you will, and I have read and been told that there was something physically about these people where you could tell which one was a Jew, which one was a Samaritan. I don't know if it was skin color or a facial feature or what, but it was obvious to Jesus. Of course, Jesus knows everything. This woman was not of His Jewish nationality. But that didn't stop Him from presenting information to her. In our day, isn't it easy to look at someone else and say, oh, that person is different from us. They would never listen to the gospel. That's kind of the way we're wired, and we have to train ourselves to get past that and realize no matter the cultural difference of this person, they are a child of God. Turn back a chapter, please. In John chapter 3, here comes the story of Nicodemus. Verse 1, he's a Pharisee, and he's also a ruler of the Jews. Well, it's easy to look at someone and say, oh, they're too rich for us. They would never listen to us. They're too important for us. They have other things on their mind. They would never listen to the gospel. But here's the prime example of that. And he, for some reason in verse 2, comes to Jesus by night. Maybe it was the only time that he had an opening in his schedule. Maybe he didn't want to be seen. Not sure exactly why, but he makes it a point to get to Jesus and find out the information that he needs. Because he's also made in the image of God. Look with me at Acts chapter 8. Someone that is a foreigner might be someone that we would think, oh, they would never be interested in the gospel. They're already from a country that's predominantly Islamish. Is that a word? Well, a country that practices Islam predominantly, let me say it that way, or Hindu, or Buddhism, or they're from some other place that is predominantly Catholic. They would never listen to the gospel. Well, Rahab did. She was removed by 40 years, and but an entirely different country. She knew the stories. And in Acts chapter 8, we find, just to sum this up in one verse, there's this man going down the road, verse 27, behold, a man of Ethiopia, another country, a eunuch of great authority under Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who had charge of all her treasure, and had come to Jerusalem for to worship. This man crosses several of these barriers on the screen, doesn't he? He's also a foreigner. He's also one of these rich men. He's in charge of the treasury. He's not going to be the beggar out in the street. He's moved on up in his social class. And he's sitting there reading the scriptures that he can get hold of. People do want to know about the Bible. And this list just goes on and on. Let me just put 1 Corinthians 6 onto your plate for your consideration, because we just don't have enough time or room on the screen to go through everything that there possibly could be a barrier about talking to someone referencing Jesus Christ. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 9, know ye not that the unrighteous shall not inherit the kingdom of God? Be not deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor effeminate, nor abusers of themselves of mankind, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners shall inherit the kingdom of God. Quite a list there of all these people that cannot get to heaven. Verse 11, and such were some of you. What a powerful phrase. Such were some of you, some drunk that you see on the street. They would never listen to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, that was the person in Corinth. They'd been a drunkard, and somehow the gospel convicted them. So yes, the people that we tend to think of as an unlikely audience might turn out to be the very people. Well, there is risk involved, just like there was for Rahab. First, there is risk for the other guy. Look with me, please, in Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8, here comes the parable of the sower. I simply want to pick out one aspect of this parable. Luke chapter 8 and verse 8. And other fell on good ground and sprang up and bare fruit an hundredfold. When he had said these things, he cried, he that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Now skip with me down to 15 and 16. The explanation. But that on the good ground are they which in an honest and good heart, having heard the word, keep it, and bring forth fruit with patience. No man with light to kindle covereth it with a vessel, or putteth it under a bed. Suppose you go your entire life being a Christian, and you manage to only convert one or two people. Just suppose that's the only success that you ever had. Suppose one of the people that you managed to convert is this guy that then in a different situation and with different abilities saves 100-fold. Now, we're not here to promote Amway or some pyramid scheme, but that's exactly what it is. If someone that you have helped find Jesus Christ turns around and converts a whole bunch of people, you are responsible for that whole bunch of people. More important than that, it's not a matter of putting tally marks by your name and tracking what all you've done. The main thing is you have done your job. God takes care of the numbers. It's your job to take care of doing your job. Now, our point this morning is if you had not done all you could and converted that one guy, then under him, the 100 people would be lost. And it would be partly your fault because you did not do your job. There is risk to all those souls who could have gotten to heaven if you had done your job and converted the one. But then, of course, there's the individual risk. Matthew 7, verse 21. I have stated a couple of times publicly that to me this is one of the scariest verses in the Bible. It's so easy to show that people outside of the body of Christ go to hell. But then you turn around and read Matthew 7 and 21. Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. So sometimes people that are in the body of Christ are not going to make it to heaven. And I would submit to you this morning, by way of the lesson of Rahab, not doing your job then is one of the ways that would get you sent to hell. Well, the opposite of hell then is what we use to segue in for our invitation this morning. Rahab got salvation. She recognized who these men were. She did what she could to help them. They gave her conditions, stay in the house. She did that. They were faithful. They went in and found her, and got her and her family out. And that's such a great Bible story, that this foreign woman who's of this unlikely audience had enough faith to realize this story from 40 years ago, and by her faith saved not only herself but her whole family, or at least the ones that we read about, and then ends up in the genealogy, the family tree of Jesus Christ. What an amazing story. And just as amazing to that is Revelation 21. There are several word pictures that John uses to describe heaven, and I've just picked this one because it has several aspects, and as we read these aspects, you have a personal affinity with one of them, maybe that would be different from mine. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. That's one. There shall be no more death. That's two. Neither sorrow. That's three. Nor crying. That's four. Neither shall there be any more pain. That's five. For the former things are passed away. Verse 6. Just trying to wrap my mind around this one verse. I'll use Nolan's phrase a while ago. It boggles my mind. And then it is so awesome to try and imagine that kind of a reward for having enough faith. To copy what Rahab did. To be the one that has enough faith. To listen to what God has said. Hey, this is the power I have. This is what I can do for you. To look at what the conditions are. For Rahab, it would stay in the house. For us, it would be saved, be baptized, be faithful, meet those conditions, and then have this kind of a reward. Well, that's a pretty incredible Bible story. Fantastic thoughts to leave with you this morning, and thoughts that I have enjoyed presenting. So as we prepare to sing the song we call the Invitation Song, simply to ask you to put yourself and what you know of your own life besides Rahab. She was way past all of God's people in Numbers chapter 14, except Joshua and Caleb. Where do you rate yourself? Not compared to Rahab, of course, but is your faith lacking? Are you able to do what she was able to do? And if there's some way that your faith is lacking, if we can help you with that, we'd be honored to do so as we stand and sing number 59.